We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. Hopefully, your day is going well. It is Sunday. Sundays are always a tough podcast to do because not a lot of new stuff is happening during the weekends. We've got some stories, though. We've got some things to talk about, and we have one email. So we'll get through this one way or another. As you can hear, I still have the cold. It's getting better. I'm on a lot of cold medicines. So if I seem a little loopy from time to time, I mean, even more so than usual, that may be the reason. I will still have to cough now and again, I'm sure. And I apologize for that. But what are you going to do? I'm a guy who does a podcast every fucking day. It's not like I can take a day off. I mean, I could, but I would feel guilty then, you know? You get up in the morning, you're expecting it there. I should have it there if I can get through it. And I can get through it. I've dealt with tougher situations than this. And we're talking about an hour. It's not crazy difficult. When I was on the air back in the old days, I was on for like 7 hours in a day. So this ain't shit. We can do this without any problem at all. We do have one email, and this one comes from Eric, who's a recent guest. He's our friend from Iowa. He says, "Hi, Mike. I wanted to touch on Garage Door Jeff's concerns about Dirty Diaper Donnie winning the Iowa caucus. Donnie doesn't get along with COVID Kim Reynolds, and for some reason, she's very popular in this state. If she is endorsing DeSantis, there's a good chance DeSantis will win the caucus. I recently saw either an ad or a rally speech in which he was bashing COVID Kim. It will not work in his favor here. However, as much as I enjoyed the attention being the first in the nation brought to Iowa, there is a reason the Democrats no longer have Iowa as the first in the nation. The Des Moines Register ran an article prior to the 2020 caucus, which said that the Iowa caucuses have only picked the winner of the election 3 times out of 18 times since 1972. Honestly, if Dirty Diaper Donnie is not deemed ineligible for the election, I hope he wins the Iowa caucus because it would give me a little more peace of mind that there's no way he will win the election." When you were talking about the case that Mike Johnson was part of involving religion in schools, you were correct. You said that they would be pissed if any other religion acted like they did. These fuckers don't care about religious freedom, but they only want freedom to force everyone else to practice Christianity or the conservatives' perverted version of it. I remember either prior to Obama's win in 2008 or during his presidency that there was all kinds of fear propaganda about Muslims passing a bunch of laws using Muslim Sharia law. This led to ballot measures in Oklahoma trying to ban Sharia law from being considered by politicians and judges. I saw an article today from Business Insider talking about what would happen if Donnie doesn't live to the 2024 election. Fingers crossed. It was refreshing to see any news source talking about him not making the possibility of Trump's health giving out. Long story short is there are options for the Republicans to pick another candidate, but how complicated it becomes depends entirely on when he would die. The easiest options for Republicans would be if it happened before the Iowa caucuses, followed by during the primaries. Lastly, I saw a video recently of an incident at the Jets and Dolphins game. Apparently, one of the Jets players hit a referee and even drew blood. I know this isn't a political story, but the comments section of the video was horrible. The attitudes that have invaded our political sphere don't stop at politics. There were tons of comments blaming the referee for getting hit, calling the referee soft, saying that he was too old to be there, say he deserved worse, and more. While I think some of these attitudes were always present, the ability to be anonymous on the internet and Donald Trump have spurred this on. We not only need to bury the extreme Trump-la-fuck movement in politics, but also get some civility back in general. Thanks, Eric. And I agree. It's strange because it seems like everybody is triggered about any possible thing. I've told you the stories about my wife working with the airline, people coming too late for the to get on the flight, and then being angry at the customer service people because they won't put them on the flight. I mean, what do they think? They're fucking OJ Simpson and they can uh, dash across the airport and make it when it's already pushing back? I don't know. People have this thing, this entitlement thing. A lot of people do, and it's more so Republicans than Democrats, but we have some Democrats too. It's either going to go my way or I'm going to get mad and I'm going to try to intimidate you. I've been waiting for that to happen to me because I'm not easily intimidated, regardless of who it is. And that's not necessarily bravery. That may be stupidity, but that's just how I am. People who want to force their will on you, whether it's right or wrong or legal or illegal. But that seems to be the case these days, especially if you're a wealthy, entitled, positioned person. You think you're better than everybody else. So when somebody has the audacity to push back on you, you rear up and act like a tough guy. I can tell you this, most people that are out there acting like tough guys are not tough guys. They're insecure, and that's why they do what they do. All that needs to happen to one of these folks is to have somebody say, fuck that, and slap the taste out of their mouth. That will get them to back off very quickly. But again, that involves a certain amount of violence. And it is something that's a problem in this country right now. Everybody wants to go to anger, wants to go to fear, and wants to go to threats. Most people who make threats don't have the balls to back it up. They're hoping against hope that you fade back and be afraid. But we do need some civility back in this country. I mean, I'm a 63-year-old guy. If somebody came up to me and pulled that shit on me, I'm not going to get into a fight. There's all kinds of reasons for it. Legal reasons. The fact that I'm 63, I'm not as strong and have as much stamina as I did back in the day. But I don't know what it is. It does seem to be entitlement. Excuse me. I'm sorry. This is going to happen. So, Eric, I agree with you 100%. We have too much aggressiveness in this country. And it's weird. Most of the people acting tough really aren't tough. They just think they're entitled to special treatment, that their will is more important than anybody else's. And it's not. And somehow they need to be taught a lesson and trained in proper behavior. So with that, those of you that want to be aggressive, you better stop it. I'm going to kick your fucking ass. You're absolutely right, Eric. And I don't know how we change it. I think a lot of this came into being with Donald Trump, the divisiveness he created in this country, and the unwillingness to admit when somebody's wrong. That's where the problems lie. And the fact that Republicans think that Democrats are trying to destroy this country, and the Democrats know the Republicans are trying to destroy this country. People think they're heroes or they're desperate to save whatever they have because they continually get told by the media and their respective parties that the other side is the absolute danger to this country. And that has to change. And the thing about it is that isn't going to change very quickly. It's going to take some time to do that. I don't know what the answer to that is. That's why I always say, we got to take things a step at a time. If we look at all the problems we have and we decide that we want to try to fix them all, it becomes overwhelming and we don't fix anything. So we have to fix things a step at a time. First step is to eradicate Republicans, people we cannot trust in our government, eradicate them from government, finish up with Donald Trump, get him out of the narrative, and then we can worry about actually fixing things. But it's not going to be easy and it's going to take a lot of time. You don't get this deep down the rabbit hole without having to dig your way out. And as I say, that takes time. All right. Well, we've got what's going on in the Middle East, the war between the Israelis and Hamas. Hamas militants on Saturday released 17 hostages, including 13 Israelis from captivity in the Gaza Strip, while Israel freed 39 Palestinian prisoners in the latest stage of a 4-day ceasefire. The late-night exchange was held up for several hours after Hamas accused Israel of violating the agreement. The delay underscored the fragility of the ceasefire, which has halted a war that has shocked and shaken Israel, caused widespread destruction across the Gaza Strip, and threatened to unleash wider fighting across the region. Now, I think it's important you understand that this ceasefire is only temporary. But as I said before, it's the first step. You can't fix this situation that hasn't been fixed in decades. You got to take it a step at a time. And Joe Biden is the absolute perfect person to do it. He's got the experience, he's got the temperament, and he's got the motivation to do it. He's getting blamed for supporting Israel, even though that's his only choice. And when he goes into this thing, he's kind of trying to broker peace rather than perpetuate this war. It's a much different situation than the Ukraine-Russia thing. We're much more aggressive in the Ukraine thing because Russia is attacking Ukraine. We're giving them money and weapons and ammunition to fight back and push these people back. That's not what we're doing in Israel and with Israel and Hamas. We're supporting Israel as we're supposed to do as allies to them, but we're also trying to calm things down a little bit. There's going to be no peace treaty with Ukraine and Russia. Somebody's going to have to win that because Vladimir Putin just won't back down. Now, in the case with Israel and Hamas, I think there's more room to get some kind of settlement. I mean, Israel is pissed, and they are rightly pissed given what happened to them. They were attacked. They want to wipe Hamas off the face of the earth. And we know that Joe Biden agrees with that strategy. Get rid of them. They are terrorists. But in the mix, we've got all these innocent people that end up being collateral damage. So the best idea is to calm things down. And I think Joe Biden's going to be able to do that. And as I've said in previous podcasts, when he does that, he'll go from being the heel to the hero. And this will work for Joe Biden coming up in 2024. The Republicans will find something to bitch about it, but they won't have much to say if things get settled down between now and 2024, which I have a feeling it will. I mean, I don't know that this war can sustain itself for very long. Hamas fucked around and found out, bombed Israel, but Israel is strong enough that they can probably destroy Hamas unless Iran and Russia back them up. And maybe that would lengthen this war. But I think now that everybody knows what the deal is, they're less likely to do it because it's going to be hard for them to deny that they're working with Hamas and then trying to explain why they're helping Hamas fight Israel. Now, the ceasefire brokered by Qatar and the United States is the first extended break in fighting since the war began. Overall, Hamas is to release at least 50 Israeli hostages and Israel 150 Palestinian prisoners. All are women and minors. And I'm surprised that Hamas even gives a shit about that. They don't care about the civilians. They're a terrorist organization. They don't care who dies. I think this is more about this for Hamas doing this hostage exchange is more about getting a break in the fighting because they can't compete with Israel. Israel is pummeling them. And so this gives them some time to settle down, regroup, and do whatever. Maybe gives them some opportunity to come up with a different answer to what's going on here and hopefully get a permanent agreement agreed upon. Israel said the truce can be extended by an extra day for every additional 10 hostages freed, but has vowed to quickly resume its offensive and complete its goals of returning all hostages and destroying Hamas military and governing capabilities. Now, the plight of the hostages has gripped the Israelis' public attention. Thousands of people have gathered in central Tel Aviv on Saturday in solidarity with the hostages and their families. There's a lot of celebration for the hostages that were able to come home. Many accuse Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of not doing enough to bring the hostages home. And I think that's a fair complaint. Let's be honest. Benjamin Netanyahu is basically an Israeli Trump. Hardcore conservative. I don't know that he cares about the civilians or this is just about an ego thing that somebody attacked his country. Not a fan of Netanyahu, and he's done nothing to make anybody feel confident about him, especially his own people. Now, the releases have triggered mixed emotions. Happiness, of course, coupled with some angst over the scores of hostages who remain in captivity. Can you imagine? You hear that hostages are going to be released and you're hoping that your loved one is one of those being released, but then you find out they're not. That's almost tougher than knowing they're in captivity, knowing that there was a chance that they could release one of your own and then they don't. This is a very untenable situation. I can't imagine the fear and angst that we're seeing in Israel and with the civilians in Palestinian civilians in Gaza. This whole thing was unnecessary to do it this way. There needs to be more peace talks and compromise. And that's one of the problems here. Neither side is willing to compromise much. So we end up having an attack like this. It's ill-advised, but we're dealing with a different type of people than we deal here in the United States. As much as we are aggressive and maybe adversarial, they don't have the restraints in Israel and with Hamas that we would do. It's eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And I understand that. I'm oftentimes that way too. But we're not going to get Israel and Hamas to behave like America. And I'm not saying they should. Like I've said so many times, I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't know all the details of it. I don't know what kind of atrocities are going on there or who's committing them. So for me to have an opinion of who's right and who's wrong is ridiculous. And anybody else in America that says they should have an opinion is a little ridiculous. Now, save for Israelis here in the United States or Palestinians in the United States, you do have a dog in the fight, and I understand your opinions and your arguments. But for us dumb white people, we need to stay out of it. Let Joe Biden do what he does best. Use diplomacy and his years of experience to hopefully settle this thing down. Now, the office of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu announced early Sunday that it had received a new list of hostages slated to be released later in the day in the third or fourth scheduled swaps. Now, in the West Bank, hundreds of people burst into wild celebrations for a second night as a busload of Palestinian prisoners arrived early Sunday. Teenage boys released in the deal were carried on the shoulders of well-wishers in the main square of the town of Al-Bara. But the mood of the celebration was dampened by scenes of destruction and suffering in Gaza. I don't know if you've seen the video, but it is absolutely horrific. So for the people in the Gaza Strip, this has to be kind of a godsend, this respite from this war, but it's got to be difficult at the same time knowing that in a short time, in a couple of days, that it's going to begin again. This whole area is nothing but tragedies. It's a tragic situation. And all we can hope for is that with the help of Joe Biden and maybe Qatar and some of the other places, we can get this thing done and over with and stop the death and destruction. Now, for Ahmad Abu Hayr, a resident from the Jambalia refugee camp in Gaza City area, the pause meant he could again search for the remains of his home, which was flattened in an Israeli attack. He found bodies of a cousin and a nephew, bringing the death toll in the attack to 19. His sister and 2 other relatives are still missing. We want to find them and bury them in dignity, he said. The United Nations said the pause enabled it to scale up the delivery of food, water, and medicine to the largest volume since the resumption of the aid convoys on October 21st. It also able to deliver 129,000 liters, about 35,000 gallons of fuel, just over 10% of the daily pre-war volume, as well as cooking gas, a first since the war began. Now, as I've told you, this whole situation with this pause, it is to stop the fighting. It is to exchange hostages, but it's also humanitarian efforts to get people resources that they need to survive. I mean, that's one of the toughest things. In spite of the fact that there are bombs going off all over the place, these people have been without food and water and medicine and fuel. Can you imagine what that would be like? It's a frightening situation. And I feel for the people over there on both sides because they're both struggling. I've said before, I see this as a fight between the government of Israel and the terrorist organization of Hamas. And in the middle of it, we have civilians who just want to lead their lives, raise their families, and have a little enjoyment in their life. But they're caught in the middle, and they, of course, are collateral damage here. And apparently Hamas and the government of Israel don't seem to care as much about that as beating their opponent. And that to me is troubling. We would expect better out of civilized groups. Now, in the southern city of Khan Yunis, a long line of people with containers waited outside a filling station. Hassam Fayed lamented that the pause in fighting was only for 4 days. Yeah, it's nice to have the pause, but when you know that what you've been going through, the tragedy and all of this, that it's going to start back up, that anticipation has to be very, very difficult. So I'm hoping this pause gets hostages released and gets people thinking about and talking about an ultimate resolution to at least stop this permanently, to deal diplomatically instead of lofting bombs into one another's neighborhoods. I want to talk about George Santos a bit. Georgie's pissed. He's not happy. Representative George Santos from New York, obviously a liar, a grifter, a thief, and he's got some big problems, of course. He was on a 3-hour long live audio program. I suppose that's a podcast. And he said, "You want to expel me? I wear it like a badge of honor," he declared, adding, "I'll be the only one expelled because people did not like me." No, George, it has to do with your criminal activity. I'm sorry, but you lied to get where you are, and then you used campaign money to buy OnlyFans. It's not just because we don't like you. Now, make no mistake, we don't like you, but it has more to do with your criminal and corrupt activity. Now, Santos spoke with conservative host Monica Matthews on X Spaces, formerly known as Twitter Spaces, around 2 weeks after a damning House ethics report found out that he spent thousands of campaign dollars foolishly. Now, Santos said, "I will defend myself to the end of time." I will say this, George, time is short for you. Even before he took the oath of office in January, Santos had been plagued by allegations ranging from silly to serious. He previously admitted to lying about certain elements of his background. Yeah, he lied about everything, claiming that he was Jewish and he had worked for elite financial corporations. His answer to that is, well, everybody lies on resumes. Yeah, George, that's how it works. Everybody lies on resumes, but not to the extent that you lie on resumes. So the fact is, George is probably going to be expelled sometime next week. They're going to vote on it. The Republicans want him out. The Democrats want him out. He will be out. And he is pissed about it. Downright bitchy. Yeah, he's not happy about it, and he's talking some shit now. Now, Republican chairman of the House Ethics Committee, Michael Guest, has already filed a resolution for his expulsion that will likely be put to a vote, as I said, next week. Santos initially lashed out at Guest, calling him a pussy. The report, a vacuous political hit piece, and the committee, a fucking weaponization of who they don't like. It ain't going to be the dude from Mississippi that's going to kick me, a New Yorker, out of Congress. No offense to the people from Mississippi. He also steadfastly refused to consider stepping down. "I'm not going to resign. I haven't been found guilty of anything." Well, the evidence pretty much says you're guilty, dipshit. So you may want to consider that. I got to tell you, George has got to be a little mentally ill. I mean, all this evidence we've seen, and he's still denying it. But he repeatedly asserted that it's not over until I say it's over. George, I don't think you have that kind of authority. I don't think that's the case anymore. But Santos later acknowledged that he would probably be out of a job soon. Yeah, that's true. He says, "I know I'm going to get expelled when this expulsion resolution goes to the floor because people are so quick to judge and ask and demand for political expediency." He says, "Have at it. It's a badge of honor for me." He said again throughout the interview, which included an exchange with fellow Representative Robert Garcia, Democrat. Santos portrayed himself as a victim of cold political calculations. And he was pressed by Garcia, do the right thing, and resign. Santos likened the resignation to admitting guilt. Well, motherfucker, you are guilty. There is no question you are guilty. You're going to go on trial for your multiple felony charges, and you're going to go to jail because you ain't nobody. You have no power, no authority, and you're done. So then he does what these fucks do. He framed his inevitable departure from Congress as his own choice. Yeah, I don't want to be here anyway. I'm not running for re-election because I don't want to work with a bunch of hypocrites. It's gross. You're not running for reelection because you would get your ass kicked. And the fact is, you may end up being precluded from actually doing it because you'll be doing a stint in jail. We'll see how your lies go in jail. And then he starts going after his colleagues, which is where the bitchy part comes in. I have colleagues who are more worried about getting drunk every night with the next lobbyist that they're going to screw and pretend like none of us know what is happening. And then sell off the American people, not show up for a vote because they're too hungover or whatever the reason is. He went on without naming names. Santos made other accusations against anonymous colleagues later in the interview, lamenting about a decline in coverage of extramarital affairs. Ever since I've taken Congress, reporters don't care to write about adultery anymore, he said. And trust me, there's plenty in this Congress, and nobody writes about it anymore because George Santos is here. If it does get covered, he said, it's on an obscure blog or buried in the newspaper. It's not front page like it used to be. Kind of like Donald Trump. Why are you picking on me with all this crime going on out there? You're ignoring all the crime. George Santos sounds a little like Madison Cawthorn. Remember, he did kind of the same thing. I'm getting kicked out of here, but all you fuckers are horrible. Now, I don't question at all what George Santos is saying. He's probably absolutely right. There are some horrible people in the House of Representatives and the Senate for that matter. Things don't get written about. They have side deals with media or whatever the fuck they do. But this is why I suggested, it's one thing to look into George Santos. I think George Santos has a good idea. I think we should look into all members of the House, where they get their money, how they spend their money, what other kind of shit are they in, what clubs are they involved in, who are the clubs they're speaking to. We should know all of this. There should be transparency with our members of Congress, and there isn't. And I'm talking about Democrats as well as Republicans. These are some horrible people. They think of themselves as elite. They've got money and they've got power and they do whatever the fuck they want. And they don't do anything for us. So that's troubling. So I've said before, we need to get the Republicans off the stage so we can get down to actually fix what's going on. But if you think we're bringing in the heroes when it comes to the Democrats to fix everything, don't get too confident about that. When they get in, they'll be better than the Republicans, but anybody would be better than the Republicans. But we need to make sure they're on a short leash too, because they have a track record of not doing the things we need them to do as our representatives. When they get power, and they will get power in 2024, we need to keep pushing and go hard on these fuckers to make sure they don't get lazy or fat and happy, because that could certainly happen. But George Santos is probably going to be gone this week. It'll be interesting if he gets some courage up and he actually names some names about all these horrific behavior by some of his colleagues. That could make it fun, could make it interesting. We'll see what George does, but we're going to miss you, George, if for no other reason, for comic relief, because you're a fucking joke. All right, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. So Donald Trump showed up in South Carolina last night, went to a football game. It's a red state. You would think he'd do well down there. But apparently when he got out of his limo and was walking to the football game, he got pretty heavily booed. There were even people who put up billboards in South Carolina basically saying Donald Trump lost. I'm thinking that Donald Trump's stronghold in South Carolina may be in a bit of trouble. And he's got another issue too. Donald Trump made a big deal of attending the South Carolina Palmetto Bowl, where he hoped to show up GOP rival Nikki Haley at her alma mater. She, of course, was the governor of South Carolina at one point, and she's probably a little more popular than Donald Trump at this point. But as I say, the crowd wasn't exactly all that excited to see Donald Trump. And this has got to hurt his ego. And his ego is pretty much what drives him. Trump teased the appearance on Truth Social, saying hours earlier that he was getting ready to leave for the great state of South Carolina to attend the Palmetto Bowl. He said, "Will be a terrific game. See y'all later." But his appearance itself was a bit of a mixed bag, according to video provided by Fox Carolina sports director Beth Houle. Former President Trump has arrived ahead of the kickoff at Williams-Brice Stadium, she wrote in a video posting that she made. But social media users, including popular conservatives, were quick to point out, as I said, a lot of boos. People are getting tired of his bullshit. They're tired of hearing the same thing over and over again and none of it being true. Trump was met with a massive amount of boos as his SUV arrived at the Palmetto Bowl in Columbia, South Carolina, according to Republicans against Trump. A reporter posted, "You can hear the boos and explicit welcome Trump received as his SUV arrived at Williams-Brice Stadium." You got to wonder, does that impact Donald Trump? Does he feel it? Or does he just convince himself that, oh, they love me? They're not booing. They're cheering me. Donald Trump better be getting ready for this. He's going to get this reception a lot in a lot of states. Even in Iowa, I think he's ahead in the Iowa caucus, but he's got a lot of problems there. And if he doesn't win that one, that doesn't bode well for his future primaries. He's not going to win all the primaries. There's no question about it. And of course, he's going to claim that each one of those he didn't win were probably rigged, as he would say. Donald Trump is in for a world of hurt. His ego is the most fragile thing he has, but it's the one thing that drives him. As long as he can convince himself he's the greatest, toughest, smartest, most athletic guy in the world, he's good. But once it's shown that that's not the case, it's going to be interesting to see what Donald Trump does, because I don't know that Donald Trump can handle it. I've said this before, months and months ago. I said tearing down Donald Trump's ego may be more damaging to him than putting him in jail. He goes to jail, he can play the martyr and do all that shit. But if you take away the things that he thinks makes him special, like his ego, like his popularity, like his ratings, his money, his power, his prestige, his property, you take all of that away and there isn't much left over, nothing more than a shell. And then it's going to be interesting to see what Donald Trump does then. That's going to be the real question. We had some interesting comments coming from a former spokesperson for Attorney General Merrick Garland. Kind of dropped the hammer on Southern District of Florida Judge Aileen Cannon by accusing her of trying to disrupt the multiple trials of Donald Trump, not just the trials she's officiating, but all of them, with timing and all that sort of stuff. Now, this spokesperson was on with Charles Coleman Jr. His name is Anthony Coley, was asked about Cannon's slowness in bringing Trump to trial in the federal obstruction case of justice brought by a special counsel, Jack Smith, over the documents. Coley was asked by the MSNBC host, "We haven't heard much from Jack Smith, understandably. We have not heard much from Merrick Garland. The closer that these trials get pushed toward an election, Would you advise either of them to say something publicly about the need to either hold off or to need to press the gas? And if so, which one? This is what he said. I don't imagine them to say anything else out of the courtroom, he began. Listening to you talk about this is really interesting because my takeaway is that Judge Aileen Cannon, in this case, she feels like she's a referee who's trying to rig the game before any of them starts. That is how I view this. The fact of the matter is that the evidence in the documents case is so overwhelming. We're not talking about George, something that a witness may or may not have overheard secondhand in a coffee shop, he added. We are talking about here solid evidence, firsthand accounts from people who were in Donald Trump's employ with photographic evidence, videotapes from Mar-a-Lago. The government's case is airtight. And I would note they're really successful in winning these types of cases up to 98% of the time. So that brings up the question, when is Jack Smith going to do something about Aileen Cannon? If she can impact the case in Florida, but also somehow kind of disrupt the other cases, she's a serious problem. And Jack Smith, as I've said all along, I think knows what he's doing and is kind of setting the trap and trying to pick the right moment when he goes to the 11th Circuit to get her ass kicked out. I think that ultimately going to happen. I think all of us would like to see it happen tomorrow, but Jack Smith is going to do what Jack Smith's going to do. And we have to trust that he knows better than we do, that he knows things that we don't know. But Aileen Cannon has two problems. She's obviously trying to rig things for Donald Trump, but she's also a horrible judge. She doesn't understand the law. She makes ridiculous mistakes. And I have a feeling they're just kind of mounting up so they have enough of this evidence of her inability or attempt to side with Donald Trump that it's going to be inconvertible, and they'll have to kick her out. But I think ultimately that's what's going to happen. She's going to be out of there, and Donald Trump will scream like a school child because his one ace in the hole will be gone. I really thought that Aileen Cannon, after the first time she got slapped in the face, that she might try to be better now, knowing that she was kind of hanging by a thread. But it doesn't appear as though that's the case. Now, I don't know if that's out of corruption or just pure ignorance or a combination of both. It's hard to say. But she's in trouble. She's got a job technically for life, but she can be impeached too. And if she keeps getting slapped down by the 11th Circuit, there may be some efforts to do that. Now, on Saturday, Donald Trump still yapping. He launched an assault on Bob Vanderplatz, head of the Iowa-based nonprofit Family Leader Foundation, for endorsing Governor Ron DeSantis before the Iowa caucuses. So he's talking shit about a nonprofit that's not supporting him. And see, this is where the problem is with Donald Trump. Somebody crosses him like COVID Kim, the governor, or this group, Family Leader Foundation, he's going to immediately go scorched earth, burn all the bridges. And that won't bode well for him in the Iowa caucus. Now, on November 21st, the influential evangelical leader threw his support behind the Florida governor, who's got an uphill battle of his own in the state to overtake the former president in a key battle for the 2024 Republican nomination. Now, according to Vanderplatz, he says, I think America would be well served to have a choice. And I really believe Ron DeSantis should be that guy. And I think Iowa is tailor-made for him to win this. Have you not looked into this fucking clown? Like I've said before, I think, people were looking for an alternative Donald Trump because he carried too much baggage. They saw a guy that was from a big state that was talking kind of like Donald Trump, and they just latched onto him without really looking into his background or his intellectual level or what kind of human he was. So they grasped him, and everybody jumped on board. And now we're finding out a lot of things about him that don't make him quite as appealing. He's awkward, he's weird, and I think that will be on in a showcase on November 30th when he's in this ridiculous debate with Gavin Newsom from California. This is not going to be a good thing for Ron DeSantis. This might end his entire campaign. If he doesn't win the Iowa caucus, he's probably done at that point too. So Ron DeSantis' moment in the sun is starting to fade very quickly. Now, apparently Trump took exception to the idea of DeSantis being the guy and took to Truth Social to attack the evangelical leader while also accusing him of selling his endorsement. You see where the problem is there? You start pissing off the evangelical leaders. That's kind of your fucking base. What are you doing, Donald? You trying to intimidate them to change their support? That's not going to fucking happen. So Donald Trump said this: Bob Vanderplatz, the former high school accountant from Iowa, will do anything to win, something which he hasn't done in many years. He's more known for scamming candidates than he is for victory, but now he's going around using disinformation from the champions of that art, the Democrats. Now, the funny thing about it is if this group decided to support Donald Trump, he would be singing his praises. What a wonderful guy. He's a genius. And that's how ridiculous and childish Donald Trump is. All you have to do is pat him on the back, tell him he's a good boy and he's very smart, and he will say anything about anybody, whether it be Vladimir Putin or Bob Vanderplatz. Now, referring to a report from August that revealed the DeSantis campaign, a super PAC linked to him funneled $95,000 to the Family Leader Foundation. Well, that's interesting. Maybe Donald's right. Maybe they did buy the endorsement. I don't believe anything Bob Vanderplatz says. Anyone who would take $95,000 that endorse a candidate who is going nowhere is not what elections are all about. I would have to agree with Donald on that. But that's how slimy the Republicans are. That's how slimy the evangelicals are. And it's pretty amazing to me that more of this doesn't come out. More of this isn't exposed. I think our politics is absolutely filthy with money and grifting and corruption. And I think it's on both sides to a certain extent. More so on the Republican side. Like, this is a perfect example. Now, had these people supported Donald Trump and given him $95,000, or they'd give him $95,000, he wouldn't have said a word about it. That wouldn't be corruption in his own mind. It's a means to an end. It's the greater good in his mind. But because Ron DeSantis gave him $95,000 and they gave him an endorsement, that should be up for question. I agree with Donald Trump in that case. But who really fucking cares? Because Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, any of those fuckers can't win the presidential election. They're just dicking around, spending money ridiculously. And when it's all said and done, they'll be left holding nothing. I really don't have a lot of interest in the Iowa caucus. I know some people make a big deal out of it. It's obviously Republican, and there's a lot of candidates that don't have a prayer. At this point, Ron DeSantis doesn't even have a prayer, even with that endorsement. He's so far behind Donald Trump. I don't know how he makes that up. I don't know how he comes out ahead in that situation. Just doesn't seem possible. Moving on, New York Times correspondent and CNN analyst Maggie Haberman told an interviewer that Donald Trump was never the clearest orator, but his recent miscues are pretty striking, even by that standard. Now, you know how the Republicans are constantly talking about Oh, Joe's got dementia. He can't even complete a sentence. I haven't seen Joe Biden not complete a sentence. He says some goofy stuff. He makes some gaffes now and then, but he's been doing that the entire 50 years he's been in politics. This ain't nothing new. And I can deal with some gaffes over the prospect of fascism. I don't know. The lesser of two evils, I guess. President Joe Biden's campaign has been highlighted. They've been highlighting a raft of Trump gaffes recently, mixing up Biden and former President Barack Obama, misidentifying countries, not knowing what town he's in, to name a few, and pushing for the media to cover them like they do concerns about Biden's age. Haberman, who's reporting Trump is known to pour over, was the guest on the episode of Jamie Weinstein's The Dispatch podcast this week and roasted Trump over those gaffes while noting he was already not regarded highly as a public speaker. That's how the conversation went. Weinstein, has he changed? In what ways has he changed? Personality wise, health wise, demeanor wise? Is there changes in any of those areas that are very noticeable? Haberman said, it's a good question. Look, health wise, I don't really know how to answer that. He's obviously a much older man. The job takes a toll on every president, and he's an older man who was already not a young man when he was president. But he doesn't appear noticeably different physically from what I've seen. But I will note that we are seeing him publicly less, which is true. He's doing fewer rallies, which his team generally attributes to trying to conceive because those rallies are very expensive to put on, and his credit isn't good anymore. I added that. But I would also know that it's his energy saving, right? I mean, you're less likely to wear out a 77-year-old man with several rallies a week than you are doing them a few times a month or even once a month. He doesn't need to do a ton of them right now. He's so far ahead in the polls that I don't think they see a huge advantage for it. I have noticed that lately my colleagues, Michael Gold and Michael Bender, wrote about this. He's making a bunch of verbal miscues that have been pretty striking. He's not exactly ever been the clearest of articulators, or of speakers or orators, but he keeps appearing to believe Obama is still the president. He confused Orban with Erdogan. So I don't know if it's fatigue. I don't know if it's a distraction. I don't know what it is, but that's been a little notable. Now, the thing with Obama is interesting to me. He does make that mistake a lot, but he's also spilled out a conspiracy theory that Joe Biden is just a puppet for Obama and Obama is running the show. Maybe that's what he's referring to. I don't want to give him credit, but he did say the latter, and that may be what he's referring to. But that's one thing I've noticed with Donald Trump. He will say things that maybe refer to conspiracy things he said, and he will appear to make a mistake, but he's not smart enough to reference where this was coming from. He just spews forth. He just spills this shit out. He's not a good orator. He is kind of confused now. And that makes some sense given the fact that he's a cornered rat. He doesn't know where to turn. And as I've said before, when somebody like him gets in this position, they will say and do pretty much anything. They're flailing. They're throwing shit against the wall and hoping something sticks. And unfortunately for Donald Trump, nothing's sticking. There was a time in 2016 and through his presidency, he could throw out the wildest lies or conspiracy theories, and a lot of people would buy into it, especially the media, which is something I've always found troubling. Why they insist on repeating the things he says when they know it's absolute bullshit. but it's all about ratings. It's all about money. And that's where my problem lies with the media. But that's not the case anymore. They're not willing to do that anymore. And this is where Donald Trump is running into problems. People aren't buying his shit. Donald Trump's not very creative either. Every time he gives a rally or a speech, it's always the same thing. He has trouble staying on track too. Like, for example, when he did his Thanksgiving greeting on True Social, he started out all right, greetings to everyone for Thanksgiving. And then he went on to say, even those, and he made a list of names for all the people prosecuting him, all the Democrats, all the judges, all the law clerks. Now, he goes off on tangents and he just gets lost in it, absolutely lost in it. Donald Trump comes off as kind of an incorrigible child, a spoiled brat, which I think is pretty much what he is. He's always had things handed to him. He's always been allowed to get away with virtually anything. And now he's starting to be accountable for things and he's confused. He doesn't know what to do with it. There's another story I wanted to talk about, and it's regarding Moms for Liberty. We know who these bitches are. They're the ultra conservative, ultra evangelical, ultra Republicans, the Moms for Liberty, that are supporting Donald Trump in all his fascist ways. They're a far-right organization whose members have dubiously portrayed themselves as protectors of America's school children. They're on the defense right now after an outreach coordinator who works with its Philadelphia chapter was revealed to be a convicted child molester. The group of self-styled mama bear types has crusaded against classroom lessons about social inequality as part of their efforts. Members have fought against LGBTQ references in schools under baseless groomer claims. Oddly enough, one of their own is a fucking groomer, is a pedophile, is a sexual deviant. His name is Philip Fisher Jr. He is a pastor. Oh, big surprise. And Republican ward leader for who coordinates faith-based outreach for Philadelphia's Moms for Liberty chapter. He's also a registered sex offender due to a 2012 felony conviction for aggravated sexual abuse of a 14-year-old boy when Fisher was just 25. Fisher insists that he did nothing wrong, but you were convicted, motherfucker. And you pled guilty to one of 12 counts filed against him after an investigation by the Chicago Police Department, according to court records. Now, Fisher told the Inquirer that his conviction was really a railroad job. Well, of course it was. Everybody in the world is wrong, and you're right. That's typical of Trumplafucks. Moms for Liberty defended itself, as well as saying that Fisher is merely a volunteer and had passed a background check. How do you pass a background check if you've got a conviction for child sexual assault? In a post on X, the group also shared photos that appears to show the results of 2 background checks by the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services that indicated no instances of child abuse on Fisher's record. Well, I'm sure that can be doctored up. Fact is, he was convicted in Chicago, but you're in Pennsylvania now. So did you not think to check a national registry? A spokesperson for the Pennsylvania DHS told the Inquirer that not all criminal convictions involving minors are considered child abuse. Really? The newspaper also noted that Fisher is listed in the state's Megan Law database of registered sex offenders. I never went out of my way to hide anything, Fisher told the Inquirer. I'm in the database. It's an easy search, volunteer or not. Fisher appears to have an active role in the organization, the Inquirer reported. Sheila Armstrong, another Republican ward leader who chairs the local Moms for Liberty chapter, said she was also surprised. She said Fisher has been active in community outreach events with local and federal law enforcement, she expresses. It's not the first time I've written about right wingers who rail against groomers while having a child sex abuser in their midst. Earlier this year, it was blogged about a registered sex offender affiliated with the extremist activist at Turning Point USA. Goes without saying that as someone who has written about institutional failures involving sex predators, I'm not really surprised by Moms for Liberty exposure here. And I wholly support the people calling the organization out for its LGBTQ equals groomer hypocrisy. This always happens this way. We've said it before. Whenever Trump-LaFuck accuses somebody of something, it's inevitable that we find out that they are, in fact, guilty of the very thing that they are accusing others of. These are despicable people. Here's a guy who's a pastor, who is a sex offender with underage kids. You don't have to be any more specific than that. If you're somebody that claims to be protecting kids from LGBTQ and all that sort of stuff, you don't have somebody like this in your midst. And I would think you'd be extra cautious in your background checks, but I'm thinking you don't. I'm thinking these people will accept anybody that will buy into their bullshit. And the question I have is, why, if a guy is a sexual offender of young children, you're using him as a spokesperson to fight against the teachings of LGBTQ and inclusiveness in schools? Why is it always these kinds of people are involved in these types of things? You know, you've got Lindsey Graham, who fights hard against the LGBTQ, but we know his background. We know his sexual orientation. It's not a very big secret. Then we look at somebody like Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House. He's very negative when it comes to LGBTQ, but there are some questionable things in his background. And I think we will hear more things about that background in the not too distant future. And why is it always Republicans? These people that claim we've got to protect the children from the LGBTQ, transgender, whatever, why is it always them railing on this? And whenever anybody is charged with a crime of that nature, it's always one of them. That seems strange. That seems ironic that they would be so head up about these things and be against them. And then amongst them, there are people that commit the very crimes. At the very least, it puts in question their credibility and their legitimacy. But then you hear what they do. They say, oh, well, we checked them out. Well, you didn't check them out well enough. And if you're trying to protect your children, it was on you to dig a little deeper and check on everybody that you embrace in the organization. But they don't do that. It's a troubling world out there. And as long as we have Republicans in any kind of power situation, we're all going to be at risk, not just our children, our democracy, and all of us. And this is why we have to really take seriously when 2024 comes along to literally eradicate all of these people out. Because even if they aren't the people that are trying to commit a coup or abuse children or abuse women or be racist, the fact that people stand with them and support them, as far as I'm concerned, make them just as culpable. If you're willing to support these people in the crimes that they commit, you're just as bad. You're an accessory after the fact. So you need to go as well. And if we have any of these folks in the Democratic side, and we know we do, we need to eradicate them. We need a big house cleaning in our government. The Republicans are just the first step. There's a lot of problems in our government. It's not working properly. We have a Supreme Court that's not credible. We've got a lot of things to fix. And the 2024 election is just the first step. After that, it's going to take years to fix the hole that we're currently in. But we need to get started now while we can and not let up. We've got to make sure we eradicate these criminals, these Republicans, from their positions of power, and then try to do what we can to fix it. People have always said, well, what if we get rid of all the Republicans? What will you have to talk about? Oh, we'll have plenty to talk about because we got a long way to go to fix this country. And we're going to try by keeping our efforts and talking loud and calling people out. That's really the only option you and I have here. So we might as well make the most of it. All right, we're going to wrap up the Rational Boomer podcast. I want to thank you for spending the time to listen. I hope you have a great day, and we will talk to you again tomorrow.